Some of the team at Regen Sonora attended the 2023 Rural Policy Forum hosted by Local First Arizona. And at that event, I was asked to speak at a panel, so I gave a short presentation, which I'm going to recreate for us now. And the prompt for the talk was Grassroots Food Systems for Stronger Communities. I'm going to apologize in advance for my voice being a little, like library soundy, and that's because my wife and son are sleeping in the other room. And you might think, why don't you do this at another time? But there really isn't a better time than right now. So thanks for bearing with me. So here we go. Let's just jump right into it. Hello, my name is Christopher Casillas. I'm a fifth-generation community member of Superior, Arizona. My Nana and Tata initiated me into being a community helper at a very young age. Here in this picture, you can see my Nana and Tata there, and sadly, my Nana has passed. My Tata is still with us. He's 97 years old. He was a town milkman, and I learned a lot from him. And this kind of experience of helping your community, for me, it really went into my bones and stuck with me. And like most people who grew up in Superior, they end up leaving to find a career elsewhere. And for me, that was in the tech industry. So in 2006, I started working for GoToMeeting, which was like the Zoom before there was Zoom. And the founder and core management team of that company started a new one, and they brought me along with them. So in 2009, I joined AppFolio as employee number 30. So we went from a couple dozen people in a room to a publicly traded billion-dollar company. I'm the director of business development, leading multiple teams. And part of the success that I had there was raising up other leaders around me. So all the managers who reported to me became directors in the company, and many of the individual contributors that I mentored ended up getting promoted to various positions throughout the company. But I gotta say, hands down, the greatest accomplishment of my time at AppFolio was meeting my wife, Amanda, and eventually started talking about having kids. And that led me to start taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture here, because I had to take seriously the societal dysfunction, the ecological destruction that I was seeing. And I needed to know why this was happening, because if I'm going to be bringing children into this world, I have to understand why there's these problems. And I felt in my bones that I needed to play some kind of a role to shift the system, to do something different. And it was around that time that I discovered this concept of what people are now calling the poly crisis, which is essentially you take all the different crises and put them together into one big lump. So then I had to ask myself the question, am I okay with this? Just passing on the poly crisis over to my children and say, oh, good luck, kid. Well, I really couldn't do that. I could not continue on the path that I was on. I couldn't keep working the job that I had, all the while thinking that I might be passing on the poly crisis over to our future children and not having any answers for them and not doing anything about it. And I just couldn't stand for that. So I knew I needed to do something about it. So I ended up quitting my job, and I went on a quest. And I went on a quest to understand why we have these issues that we're facing, and to understand what we could do about it and what role I might be able to play. So that left me on quite the journey. Went and studied with indigenous elders, with various schools of thought, with leaders in social movements, with complexity scientists, philosophers, a whole bunch of fields to have a better grasp of the situation and gain clarity on what role I could play. Thus, Regen Sonora was born in 2019. We're nurturing local potential for a resilient and regenerative future. And not that long ago, the summer solstice night of this year, Francisco Nam Hui Casillas was born. And I'm glad that I can look this little man in the eyes and say, hey, I'm doing something. I'm doing the best I can, given the situation. Okay, enough about me. Let's get into it. Let's talk about fish. You've heard the saying, right? Give someone a fish, they eat for a day. Teach someone how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. Teach a community how to replenish the fisheries, and they'll be eating for generations. So just to push this analogy further, what if you had the best fishermen in the world and you took them to this watering hole? If you took them somewhere where there's just no fish at all, does it really matter how good the person who's fishing is if there's no fish? No, of course not. Those capabilities really don't matter. Conversely, have you ever been to one of those fish farms? You don't even really need bait. You can put your line in there and you'll get something. So in that sense, you could be awful at fishing and it doesn't matter. You have this affordance here of all these fish there that the capability gap becomes less of an issue. Why are we even talking about this? What does this have to do with growing food? Well, I don't know about your area, but here in Superior, we have a lot of caliche, we have lead, and we have arsenic in our soil because of the mining activities that took place. So if you think about the analogy here, do you think our land is more like the polluted watering hole without any fish, or is it like the fish farm? At the same time, we don't have a lot of people in town who know how to grow. At least we haven't been able to find many people or be able to spend too much time with them who know how to grow. A lot of people that we talk with, they can garden a little bit, but they're not really able to grow a bunch of food. And so that definitely includes us here, that we had a huge knowledge gap in this. So this also became a challenge of us not having the capabilities. So we don't really have the affordances to make it easy, and we also have these capability gaps. So the move becomes, how can we lower the bar? How can we create some affordances so that way it's easier for people to do the growing that needs to be done for us to have a resilient local food system? And at the same time, how do we distribute the capabilities for people to grow food so it's not just a few pockets here and there, but it really is a resilient network of people who are producing food locally? Okay, Chris, that's some good theory, but what about practical application? What about practical application here? Well, I'm glad you asked. We work with what we call theory-informed practice, so let's look at the practice. So thanks to the late Carl Erickson, who was a community member who owned this burned down lot, he wanted it to go to something good for the community, and his estate found out about us and what we were doing, and so they offered us this lot for $1,200. So all of a sudden, we own a piece of land. That's a pretty nice affordance. And here we are with some humble beginnings here, picking up the trash. And then we got to work on building some raised beds. So here you see Mike Montiel, you see Miguel Sanchez, you see Beto Cervantes, all working on building what's called a LEAR garden. That stands for Linking Ecosystems and Hardware for Regeneration. And so this is a 24-foot bed that we built. And the idea here is that instead of growing in the ground, we grow in these raised beds. Here you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, Julio Castañon, he's adding some wood chips into this raised bed that we have. And what we do is inoculate the wood chips with mycelium, we add earthworms, and we let nature do its natural processes. So let's take a look. Here you can see my tata, who you saw in that earlier picture, checking out the harvest. This was in the middle of summer. And we're really proud of what happened here because at this point, none of us really knew anything about growing, yet we were able to grow all this. So without a lot of capabilities, but with some good affordances, look what we were able to do. We didn't know anything about fungi to bacteria ratios. We didn't know if the white grubs that we were seeing inside the soil were good or bad. We didn't know what it meant when some of the plant leaves turn yellow. There's all kinds of things we didn't know at the time, but we were able to learn as we went along. So here you see Miguel happy with the fruits of his labor, and you can see we've got another LEAR garden that we've added here too. And of course we have planting parties. Typically these happen in the full moon. It's a nice way to get people exposed to the work that we're doing. They can get their hands dirty and get to plant, and they can plant something and then come back and check it out later and say, hey, I planted that. And look here, you see young people getting their hands dirty, learning about where their food comes from. And I got a question for you. How much is this worth? You know, you see kids like this with all excited with smiles on their faces about putting plants into the ground. How much is that worth? $100? $200? Right? Just asking that question just doesn't make sense, right? And I think that's the point that I want to make here is that you're probably already familiar with monocropping and how bad that is for the soil. I remember when I was, before I knew about all this, I would be driving somewhere and see long fields of, let's say, just rows and rows of corn or something. And I thought, oh, awesome, we're growing food. Well, now I look at that and say, oh, geez, we are depleting the soil, because that's what happens with monocropping. Monocropping ends up depleting the soil. You get less yields over time. It's not good for biodiversity. It's a problem. And this monocrop mentality is something that I want to use as an analogy for this other issue that we have, which is much more significant. And that is the fact that we have a mono-capital economic system. We only recognize one form of capital, and that's financial capital. And so it's all about money on money returns, because that's the only form of capital that matters. But we know that there's all kinds of other forms of capital, right? Beyond financial capital, there's built capital, there's natural capital, human capital, social capital, political capital, cultural capital. I'm pulling this from the CCF, or Community Capitals Framework, which you can look into yourself if you want. And of course, there's cultural capital, and we put the project that we're working on in the middle there. And all those lines are showing how these forms of capital can flow and convert from one to another. So let's just look at this in more detail. Here you can see Mary Martha and Miguel building some Lear gardens. So this is developing built capital. And like we said before, those wood chips turn into some healthy soil. So you can see that the built capital is now supporting and developing natural capital. Miracle there is harvesting some of the food. That natural capital can be sold at the farmer's market or to local businesses, and that turns it into financial capital. And of course, the soil itself, because it is so rich, it ends up being a hot commodity. Here you can see us selling the soil that we harvest. We call it soupy soil, and we're happy to see that community members are buying our soil and putting it into their plants. So again, that's natural capital converting into financial capital. And take a look at Dave Barton there. He's got $40 and he's paying for some soupy soil for him and his friends. We can take that same $40 and turn right around and pay Lakin for her time helping out at the community center. And so now we're talking about human capital, because we're investing in people. So we pay people for their time as much as we can because we value their time. And we currently live in this economic system where people need money in order to pay their rent. So we still need money. And here you can see both Beto Cervantes and his daughter with big smiles on their faces. They're caretakers of the garden, and we pay them hourly to do their work. It's not just the money reinvested back into people. Human capital also includes the education and learning that you're able to gain at the same time. So here you can see Almike Montiel showing Miguel about what to look out for in the garden, and he's also in this other picture giving a workshop on soil health. And of course, there's social capital. So with those planting parties that I mentioned, you can see that people get together, they make connections, they have fun being around each other. And then, of course, there's political capital. So when you do something that's helpful and interesting, you might get some people who start to come visit you. So here we have Ana Maria, CEO of Arizona Community Foundation. We have Jenna from Local First, Kate from the Marley Foundation. So you can see it's not just about growing food. It's about developing all these forms of capital. And momentum is on our side. So we have the existing site that you saw before. And here you can see that we have a significant new addition for more growing space, and that's because of Lynn Humphreys, who worked with Arizona Community Foundation to use her late husband Tom Hall's memorial fund, plus a matching fund to help us secure this additional lot. And now we're talking about some serious affordances here. And we also won a Seeds to Grow grant through Pinnacle Prevention, and that's going to allow us to buy a bunch of power tools so we don't need to borrow Miguel's or other people's. We will have the tools there, which means that even more people can learn how to build and participate in the creation of these Lear gardens. We also did a re-grant to San Manuel Revitalization Coalition to get them a Lear garden themselves. That way another community in the Copper Corridor can try out Lear gardens for themselves and see if it's going to work for them. And of course, we didn't talk about all the other programs that are going on with Regenerating Sonora. So beyond the growing, we also run a community center. We support local entrepreneurs with technical assistance, and we're starting to look into land use and housing. And we've been meeting with a number of key players along with some of our friends in the foundation and nonprofit world. So here you can see we're meeting with the town manager and the mayor and others. And we've been convening other grassroots Copper Corridor community leaders from 3 other towns, exploring the potential of long-term place-based investment. So remember, affordances times capabilities equals possibilities. If you can create more affordances to lower the bar to make things easier while simultaneously developing the capabilities of the people you're trying to help, now you're onto something. And just as a little reminder, it's like Beto Cervantes says, sin dinero no baila el chango, which means without money, the monkey don't dance. As much as we can, we have to pay people for their time. At least that's our philosophy anyway, is that community work is valuable. And people are in a position now, especially if we're talking about rural and low income places, where people have to make decisions like, am I going to help out at the garden, or am I going to go to the valley and DoorDash or Uber? So people need to pay their bills, and helping out their community shouldn't get in the way of that. In fact, it should be possible to pay your bills because you're helping your community. And we want to thank our sponsors and partners who help make the work that we're doing possible. And if you want to learn more about us, you can check out this QR code, and we'll put some links out there too. Thank you very much.